In March 15th of 1963, the man known as Gary Stewart today was abandoned as a baby in a stairwell in an apartment complex in Baton Rouge. So this is kind of where Gary's story starts. Then in May of 2002, a lady by the name of Julia Gifford contacts Mr. Stewart's adoptive mother, and she said she's looking for her son. So in June of 2002, he meets his mother. His next obvious question is, who is my father? He notices a photograph of his father, and he says, this looks very much like the sketch of the Zodiac.
Hello, and welcome to Secrets from the Crime Lab, a science education podcast where we discuss forensic science and related scientific fields and topics. I'm your host, Angela Swartz. Today, we're doing a special episode that's presented in partnership with the Association of Forensic DNA Analysts and Administrators. Full disclosure, I am a fellow member with AFTA, so I do have ulterior motives for promoting the organization. We are a nonprofit organization, registered 501c3, and the primary purpose is to provide a forum for the exchange of ideas and information among forensic DNA scientists so we can stay current on methods and techniques and procedures that are presently used in the field of forensic science. AFTA promotes the dissemination of information on research and developments of new techniques within the field. It helps keep our membership abreast of the latest legislative issues concerning DNA analysis, gives us an opportunity to network with other DNA crime laboratories and personnel. It provides a way for us to get formal training and opportunities to attend guest lectures, and really just provides a good forum to share and troubleshoot a lot of issues that we encounter in forensic DNA. This year, we have our annual general meeting that's going to be held on July 26th through the 28th in San Antonio, Texas, at the Hilton Palacio del Rio. And I will provide a link in the show notes, but you can find more details at afda.org. That's AFDAA.org. Click on the About tab and select the meetings/workshops option. The space for the meeting is limited. So if you're interested in attending the meeting, it is open to everyone. You don't have to be in the field to attend, but do register as soon as you can to make sure that your spot is reserved. As far as meetings go, AFTA is by far one of the most economic meetings that you can attend. Registration is only $60 for non-members. So you get a lot of high quality continuing education from the guest lecturers at the meetings for a very low price. So it's definitely worth your time to look into and attend the meeting. It's a very casual, friendly space, and AFTA members are always very welcoming to everyone. So I do encourage you to attend the meeting if it's something that you're interested in doing. Now, with me today, I have one of the speakers that's going to be presenting at the meeting about what we could call possibly one of the coldest cases around. But I don't want to give away too much yet. I'm going to let George talk about that. George is also an AFTA member. He's also a fellow with the organization. And both of us have previously been chairpersons of the organization. And I don't know if you remember this, George, but you were responsible for making me give one of my first professional talks ever while you were the chairperson. I ended up giving a presentation on the validation of the Promega DNA IQ system on the Biomech 2000. So that's a bit of a history lesson for anybody out there in the field. George, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is George Schiro. I'm a forensic scientist and crime scene investigator. Been so for about the past 39 years. As Angela mentioned, I'm a fellow of AFTA. I was also former chairperson of the organization at one time. My background, I started about 39 years ago in forensic science. So I've seen a lot of changes, a lot of things come and go, a lot of developments, changes in the way we do things, changes in the way we interpret things. I began my career shortly after I graduated from college. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in microbiology from Louisiana State University. Go Tigers. And I received my Master of Science degree in industrial chemistry and forensic science from the University of Central Florida. I was fortunate enough to begin my career at the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office Crime Lab, which was just outside of New Orleans. And I think three of the most influential people I've met in forensic sciences who had a great deal of impact on me and my career were Ron Singer, who was director at the time, Louise Walzer, who became the first female president of the Association of Forensic Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners, and Joe Warren, who Joe and I forged a lifelong friendship. Many of you know him. Many people know him because he ran the program at the University of North Texas Health Science Center for molecular biology for several years. So I began doing things that what we called back then general criminalistics, which are things like marijuana analysis, gunshot residue detection, arson analysis, some late fingerprint development. And after working in that side of the lab for about a year and a half, I moved over to what was then known as the forensic serology side of the lab, where I worked with Joe Warren. He and I worked together exclusively. And back then, this was before the days of DNA. We were doing things like ABO blood grouping, looking at secretor status of individuals, seeing if they secrete their ABO blood group substances into body fluids. I continued working there. Also, while I was there, I started gaining some experience in crime scene investigation. I would ride with our crime scene investigators to see what they would do, how they would do it, how we could facilitate us working with the crime scene investigators to make things go a little smoother. I worked there for about another year and a half, and then I was hired by the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab in Baton Rouge. And while there, I continued working in the area of serology. In addition to ABO blood typing, we're also doing what we called polymorphic enzymes back then, where we were trying to, again, find genetic markers that would help us further narrow down if, a person may have contributed to a stain or not. While I was there, I also picked up some expertise in crime scene investigation. I became a regular crime scene investigator with the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab. Started working in the areas of bloodstain pattern analysis. Also continued latent fingerprint development, as well as began doing footwear comparisons, in addition to doing serology. And continued there up probably around 2000, probably around 1999, 2000 or so. Myself and my coworker, Carolyn Booker, she and I set up the first DNA lab at the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab. We validated the systems, and we trained the analysts in how to do the techniques and how to work the technology of DNA analysis. She and I both left there right around 2002, and were hired by the Acadiana Crime Lab, which was in New Iberia, Louisiana, sort of in Cajun country. We served 8 parishes in that area. Louisiana doesn't have counties. We got to be different, have parishes. So continued working there. I became the DNA technical leader of the Acadiana Crime Lab, and continued also working crime scenes while I was there. About 2013, I retired from the Acadiana Crime Lab and came over to Scales Biological Laboratory, which is where I'm at today. I'm the lab director there. The previous owner, Dr. Bo Scales, he retired and asked me if I wanted to come take over the lab, so I did. We're a private DNA testing facility located in Brandon, Mississippi. We primarily do forensic DNA analysis, but we also do a lot of human identification. We do a lot of work on bone and teeth. We also do paternities as well. So like I said, I've been doing this for quite a while. I've worked cases from all over the country. I've probably worked somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4,800 cases. I've testified in about 13 different states in federal court as well as military court. So I've been around the block a little bit, and I've been fortunate enough to be featured on a couple of TV shows and a couple of books, that sort of thing. So it's been a great career for me, and that's my story.
Yeah. So you've definitely kind of been in forensics for long enough to see the beginning of DNA.
Yes, I saw the very first bases, the first strands as they came together.
The first strands. You personally witnessed them.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's interesting. People don't realize that DNA, I guess, has been such a part of what we do now in forensics that people don't realize that it wasn't that long ago that it wasn't even available as a tool. When I got started in forensics, it was still relatively new. It was like the first iteration, one of the first iterations away from the beginning, the early RFLP days. Like they just finished transitioning away from that to the beginnings of the short tandem repeats. But you were in it like before that even happened. So
Yeah.
you've got some good skills in there for anybody that needs somebody to work a cold case for them.
Yeah, and I do get contacted from time to time where there are cases that have serology, ABO blood typing things in older cases to look at and see, help interpret the results and see if the controls worked and that sort of thing. So I do still get occasion to reach back into the toolbox and, pull out the old tools to see what we can,
Yeah. Remember what you were doing 35 years ago?
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was that long ago, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now you're going to be giving a presentation on one of these cold cases at the AFTA meeting. And it's one of those cases that everybody has heard about. And you kind of got brought in for a special reason. And I don't want to give anything away. I'm going to let you tell the story because it's really interesting. And I guess anybody that clicked on the episode is going to know because the Zodiac Killer is going to be in the title of the episode. Oh my gosh. So how did you end up getting involved in the Zodiac Killer case?
My involvement came right around 2012 or so. I was contacted by a true crime author. Her name is Susan Mustafa, who in her own right is a very colorful character. She wrote a nonfiction true crime book about Derek Todd Lee, who was a serial killer who was terrorizing people in southeast Louisiana. I'm sorry, your cat's tail distracted me a little bit. What is that?
The Secrets from the Crime Lab mascot is fully present at the moment.
Excellent. So Susan Mustafa called me when I was working at the Acadiana Crime Lab, and she goes, I've met this guy. All stories don't always start off good when you say, I met this guy. But she met this guy who claimed that his father, he believes his father was the Zodiac Killer. And she wanted to have some DNA testing done on him as well as his birth mother. And this guy's name was Gary Stewart. And Gary Stewart has a fascinating story to tell, even beside just the Zodiac thing. And I'll get into that in a minute. But Susan contacted me and said, hey, look, we got this guy. We need to have some DNA testing done on it. And I said, I work for a public crime lab. We can't accept that case. You'll need to find a private crime lab. And so I recommended Dr. Bo Scales, who is another colorful character in his own right.
I do. I remember I met him a few times. He's definitely a character.
Yeah, and he still is. And so they contacted Dr. Scales, and they wanted to have Gary's DNA tested as well as his mother's DNA tested. First of all, to confirm the fact that they were mother and child. And then they wanted to see what the obligate paternal alleles or the DNA that he inherited from his father would be, and wanted to see if maybe some sort of comparison could be done between some potential Zodiac DNA samples and Gary Stewart's paternal allele. So that testing was conducted, and based on the information that Mr. Stewart had provided, we were not able to exclude the DNA profile that he provided as part, and I'll get into how he provided this. We could not exclude him. We could not exclude the source of this DNA that was supposedly from the Zodiac as potentially being Gary Stewart's father. So that created a lot of intrigue, a lot of interest in the case. Mr. Stewart and Susan Mustafa eventually wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Animal of All. And in his book, he tells about what he believes are these connections to the Zodiac case. And I think now I should maybe take a step back and give an overall picture of the Zodiac killings for those who may not be familiar with it, and just outline the timeline as to what happened for those people who may not have heard of Zodiac or, may have heard about it but don't really know what it is.
Right. Good idea.
Yeah, there were a series of 5 known murder victims of the Zodiac. He operated up in the northern California, well, actually sort of San Francisco Bay Area of California. He claimed by the time the Zodiac finished, he claimed he had 37 victims. Okay. But there are only 5 that are actually known. And there were 2 also who survived his attacks. And like I said, I'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Were they confirmed to have survived? I thought people said they had, but they didn't.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, everyone, and thank you again for listening to an episode of Secrets from the Crime Lab. I wanted to take a moment to ask you for your support, because if you're like me, you're not a fan of ads interrupting your shows. But in order for Secrets from the Crime Lab to remain ad-free, I need your help. So if you would like to support the show, there are 3 different ways that you can help the show right now. First, and perhaps the simplest thing that you can do, is just to share it with your friends. Get the word out. That will help a lot. Share our little science corner of the universe. The second thing you could do is maybe consider making a one-time donation. Or the third thing, become a paid subscriber, and that starts at as little as $3 a month. It's super easy to do. The links are in the show notes and whatever podcast app you are using to listen to the show, or you can go directly to secretsfromthecrimelab.com and click on the little support button with the heart on it. Every little bit helps to cover the production costs, and thank you again for listening, and I hope you learned something new today.
No, they definitely survived.
Okay.
One was shot. The girl he was with died. He lived. He was able to provide somewhat of a description. And then there was another guy who he and his girlfriend were out picnicking, and they were both stabbed. He actually survived the stabbing, but she didn't. And he was also able to, and I'll get into the description as to what he saw. The story may or may not have started in October of 1966. Okay. There was a Riverside Community College freshman named Cherry Jo Bates going to school there in Riverside, California. One night in October, she was at the library, studying late, doing whatever. She went back to her car. Her car would not start. She was found later on, not far from where her vehicle was located, stabbed to death. Now, there's some people who believe that this is a Zodiac killing, but because there was some writings that were associated with her murder, that the Zodiac killer actually liked to write a lot about his killings and send letters to the newspaper, call the police, and that sort of thing. But the Riverside Police Department, who's actually investigating the case, they don't believe it's part of the series, and they are still actively investigating this cold case. So like I said, it may or may not start in October 66. The first confirmed killings of the Zodiac occur in December of 1968. There's a couple named Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. They were out on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. They were at sort of a Lover's Lane area, and a car pulled up beside them, shot them. They believe Faraday was shot first and killed, and then he shot Miss Jensen following that. I believe after that there was a phone call saying, hey, there's been this killing, and this was, I think, the first Zodiac phone call where he called the police to tell them something had happened. So then it's quiet until about July 1969. Then there's a couple that's at Blue Rock Spring Park in Vallejo, California. Again, it's sort of a Lover's Lane type thing. The couple was Darlene Ferrin and Michael Maggio. They were both shot with a 9mm Luger pistol. Miss Ferrin died, but Mr. Maggio lived. And last I saw, he's still alive today as far as I know. He described a 26 to 30-year-old average height, heavyset white male with short, curly brown hair. Okay, so this is our first description. And again, I believe there may have been a phone call that was placed to the police department saying, hey, this couple killed this couple, that sort of thing. Now, on August 1st, 1969, there were letters that were sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. These 3 letters, again, from the Zodiac, came up. In addition to the letters, there were also 3 cryptograms. Each one was a third of a message that the Zodiac had sent. It was all these symbols, and if people want to look at it up on an internet, you can see these letters that were sent. And this was called the 408 cryptogram because there were 408 characters in it. So then on August 7th, another letter arrives to the San Francisco Examiner. Then on August 8th, Donald and Betty Harden, Mr. Harden was a school teacher, he and his wife sat down and were able to actually decrypt this 408 cryptogram. And So they were able to tell what this message was. It wasn't really anything of significance or anything that led to anything that, that would lead to his identity or anything like that. It was just talking about how he was going to kill people and this and that and the other thing. In September of 1969, this is when we have the next attack. A couple named Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, they were picnicking at Lake Berryessa in Napa County, California. While they were out there, this man approached them, and he's wearing this outfit where he has a black executioner's hood on, clip-on sunglasses, and he has like this bib-like garment in front of him that has a circle with a cross through it. And he goes there and he ties them up, and then he stabs them repeatedly. Again, Miss Shepard, she did not survive the stabbing. Mr. Hartnell did survive. So that's how we knew about this guy, what he looked like. And like I said, he was just pretty much covered head to toe. So there wasn't really any real description of him.
And is that where the name, the Zodiac Killer, came from? It was all these symbols that he liked, or the symbol that he had on that symbol with the cross in it?
Well, that's what he called himself. He would send letters saying, "This is the Zodiac speaking," and he would.
So he dubbed himself. He gave himself his own serial killer name.
Right, exactly. I'll digress for a second. A couple of years back, I did Jack the Ripper case closed, presented at the after meeting, and so that's the reason.
It was an excellent talk, by the way.
Oh, thanks. In that one, it's something similar. There were letters that were sent to the police, people claiming to be Jack the Ripper, and there's only one that might have been authentic that they. But again, this same type of thing. He's sending these letters. He's sending these cryptograms. Mr. Hartnell described, again, the guy's covered up. He described a white male, estimated his weight is more than 170 pounds. And then after he stabbed them, the killer walked like 500 yards to where where Mr. Hartnell's car was parked. And he wrote on the side of his car door, referencing the Vallejo stabbing and referencing the shootings at both of those other areas. So they knew this was the same guy, essentially. He put the date, time, and all that. So after this was back in September 1969, October 11th, 1969, there was a cab driver named Paul Stein in San Francisco. He was shot to death in his vehicle, and a piece of his bloody shirt was removed by the killer. Now, in this one, there were actually 3 teenagers who saw him, and there were actually 2 police officers who encountered him but did not stop him at the time. They saw him walking away from the general direction, and they came up with a description between all the police officers and the teenagers that he was a white male of average height, 25 to 45 years of age, with a crew cut. And this is the last officially known murder of the Zodiac. And like I said, he subsequently would send letters to the police as well as to the media outlets back then, claiming that he murdered up to 37 people. As a matter of fact, 3 days after Paul Stein's killing, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter with a torn portion of Mr. Stein's bloody shirt in the letter to I guess, authenticate it. Then in November of 1969, he then sends a 340-character cryptogram to the San Francisco Chronicle. Now, this one has remained unsolved up until December of 2020, when it was finally deciphered. And again, not any information that tells anything about who he is. It just talks about what he's doing, what he likes to do, that sort of thing, why he's killing people. And then he also sent 2 other very short cryptograms subsequent to that, but those have never been deciphered because they are so short. You can't find patterns and that sort of thing. You're trying to decode.
Not enough information.
Exactly. In December of 1969, he contacted attorney Melvin Belli. And Melvin Belli was a big-time attorney back in the late 60s, early 70s. If anybody's a Star Trek fan, he was the avenging angel in one of the episodes of the original Star Trek, just so you can get a point of reference you might remember.
I'm sure there's a few people listening that remember Star Trek back then.
That's right. And it still reruns on MeTV.
It does.
So anyway, he sends Melvin Belli a letter, again, with another swatch of Paul Stein's shirt. Again, just saying, associating, who he is. Then in March of 1970, there's an incident where a lady named Kathleen Johns and her infant daughter were driving near west of Modesto, California, and a guy pulls alongside of her and he starts signaling that, pointing to her tire like she has a problem. She's having a problem with her tire. So she pulls over. He gets out. He says, "Your wheel's loose. Let me tighten it up for you." So he gets there, fools with her tire. He begins to take off. She takes off and the wheel falls off the car. So she pulls over. He circles back around and he says, "Hey, look, I'll give you a ride to the gas station," or whatever. So he takes her and her infant daughter and drives around for a couple of hours. He's passing gas stations. She's not stopping. Eventually, at some point, he stopped, and she bolted out the car with her daughter and went and hid like in the bushes. And he tried to find her, couldn't find her, and left. There's some questions if this was actually the Zodiac, but in a letter in July 1970, about 2 months after this potential abduction, he took credit for abducting her. One other case that they think might be related to the Zodiac, that there's some little bit of tense circumstances that might associate it with him. There was a lady named Donna Ann Lass, and in September of 1970, she was last seen alive in State Line, Nevada. She disappeared. Then in March 1971, the Zodiac sent a postcard to the San Francisco Chronicle that advertised some condominiums near the area where Miss Lass disappeared. So they know this postcard was from the Zodiac, but they don't know if it was some kind of cryptic message that he had something to do with her disappearance. The last anyone heard of the Zodiac was January 29th, 1974. He sent a final letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, and he's never been heard from since. Naturally, this case throughout the years has generated a lot of interest with the cryptograms and people, especially with the internet. There are several websites set up to, people talking about their favorite suspects or why they think these people are certain suspects. Probably the only suspect who sort of has been officially named was Arthur Lee Allen. He was a former school teacher who lived up in that area. And there were some things that indicated it might be him. They were kind of like these kind of little bits of circumstantial evidence. But I think it was around 2002, the San Francisco Police Department Crime Lab analyzed some DNA from some of the letters from the Zodiac. And I remember seeing it. They aired this on a TV show called Primetime, which used to be on ABC. And they were able to exclude Arthur Lee Allen as a potential suspect. Now, if you go back and look into the lore of the Zodiac, there are other killings that people think he may have been involved in. He has never taken any kind of outright credit for it. But there are these sort of other mysterious killings that happen in and around that area. So, there's some indications that it might have been him. And like I said, every now and then people, start naming these suspects. They just recently had a group that named a guy who was a house painter and a former Air Force airman as the latest suspect that they think, and again, it's all kind of the circumstantial evidence that, he had a watch. Watch was found by Cherry Joe Bates's body that had some paint on it. He was a painter, that sort of thing, and a few other things. But they've never really released any of their evidence for anybody to say that if this could be the guy. Like I said, it's a lot of things. As you probably know, in a lot of these investigations, they always have these people that pop up that he looks really good as a suspect, and we'll just find out that he's not.
Yeah, I did notice that when I was looking into it a little bit as well, that there's a lot of groups of like amateur detectives or even like retired detectives and groups that are trying to solve the case. People like hobbyists that decode the cryptograms and things like that. But I would be concerned, like even when the San Francisco Crime Lab's going back to some of that historical evidence that they have and doing DNA testing on it, I have to imagine that late 60s, early to mid 70s, we probably were not being very careful about how we were handling that evidence. So how trustworthy are we of any DNA type material that we would find on those?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. I mean, we don't know how many times it's been handled, who's done what with it, but I think the San Francisco Police Department Crime Lab focused on the stamps. Back then,
okay,
beyond some people's time,
licky stamps,
lick stamps to put them on envelopes. And like I said, when they did the analysis back in 2002, they did develop, I believe, 4 loci that were from that, and which I've kind of wondered now with investigative genetic genealogy, if I figured by now somebody certainly would have sent whether the evidence is from San Francisco PD or this from Riverside, what they have from Riverside. Vallejo also received some letters, Vallejo Police Department, and the paper there. And Vallejo said they were back in 2018 that they were doing some genetic genealogy on it, but nothing's been said to this day. Same thing with, I figured if they'd had something by now, we'd know it.
Some of that stuff takes a lot of time. We hear about it in the news now because forensic investigative genealogy is like, this bigger thing now. But I think still developing those work processes, streamlining that process and really figuring out how to do. And a lot of the databases that people were using before are locked down more now than they used to be. People are being more aware of the correct use and misuse of people's genealogical and genetic data. And so there's a lot more caution around that. So could be maybe they're keep holding it close to their chest until they get, or maybe you're right, and they haven't been able to find anything. So.
Yeah, and the other thing, as you know, is that a lot of times these genealogy family trees lead to dead ends. If someone's been adopted or something along those lines, or if there's a break in the family tree. So that could be it as well.
Yeah, you might just be waiting for that one relative to opt in.
That's right. So that's the Zodiac. Right. Now, let's get into Gary Stewart's story. Like I said, his story is fairly interesting. In March 15th of 1963, the man known as Gary Stewart today was abandoned as a baby in a stairwell in an apartment complex in Baton Rouge. So this is kind of where Gary's story starts. He was adopted by Lloyd and Leona Stewart, and they legally changed his name to Gary Stewart. It's interesting. Gary became an electrical engineer. As a matter of fact, he and I could have crossed paths back at LSU back in the day because he was studying electrical engineering at LSU around the same time I was going there. And
you maybe been in the same classes.
Well, I don't think so because I don't think we had too many crossovers with electrical engineering at the time. I was biology. I wanted to stay something easy, microbiology. So, like I said, he became a successful electrical engineer, worked for several companies in Baton Rouge. And then in May of 2002, a lady by the name of Julia Gifford contacts Mr. Stewart's adoptive mother, Leona, and she said she's looking for her son. And Gary knew he had been adopted. He knew his story. His story made, the news in Baton Rouge at the time, back in the 1960s. So he was interested in meeting her. So in June of 2002, he meets his mother. His next obvious question is, who is my father? Okay. And this also becomes interesting. And this is where it starts tying in with the Zodiac. She said his father's name was Van, and she said she didn't really remember the rest of his name and that sort of thing. So eventually, Gary started researching, and he found out that his father was a man by the name of Earl Van Best Jr. In October of 1961, Earl Van Best Jr. was 27 years old. He meets 13-year-old Judy Chandler at an ice cream parlor. And this becomes a thing of I guess, myth building by the media. It becomes known as the ice cream parlor romance. You have a 27-year-old man, 13-year-old Judy Chandler. They run away to Reno, and he marries Judy in January of 1962. Now, he and Judy go on the run, and they leave California. The authorities are probably in hot pursuit kind of thing. He ends up in New Orleans. Judy's pregnant, and on February 12th, 1963, Earl Van Dorn Best is born. Earl Van Dorn Best eventually becomes Gary Stewart.
Okay.
Earl Van Best Jr. takes his son from New Orleans, goes to Baton Rouge, abandons him in the stairwell, goes back to New Orleans. He tells Judy that, I left him at a church kind of thing. Eventually, authorities catch up with both of them in New Orleans. They arrest him. He goes to prison for a while. They also arrest Judy as being a runaway. And that's where the lost connection between Gary and his birth mother occur very early on.
Okay.
So just a little bit more about Earl Van Best Jr. He, like I said, he does some time in prison for what he's done. He eventually dies on May 20th, 1984 in Mexico City. Okay. And Gary's finding all this out through his research. Now, as he's starting to research, he notices a photograph of his father. And he says, this looks very much like the sketch of the Zodiac that was done by the eyewitnesses who had put together this description. So he then starts researching even further. He goes back and finds a marriage record where his mother and his father got married. And he gets a handwriting expert who looks at that and looks at the handwriting from the Zodiac and says, these writings are very similar. Also, there's some fingerprints that Earl Van Best Jr. had taken, and there was a scar on one of the fingers. Now, looking at some of the Zodiac fingerprints that were developed, there appears to be a similar scar. And then, like I said, he gets together with Susan Mustafa. They write this book, Most Dangerous Animal of All. Then, like I said, eventually I got the DNA results. He was able, and going back to this ABC primetime special that aired in October of 2002, I remember seeing the special. They actually showed the profile, but it was blurred out. You couldn't see it.
Okay.
Gary actually had this videotape. He froze it, blew it up, and claimed he could tell what the alleles were. And like I said, he provides me with those alleles. I compare it to his obligate paternal alleles in his profile, and the source of this profile cannot be excluded as the father of Gary Stewart. And so from there, some movie producers became interested in the story. They take all this information, and from his and Susan's book, they compile this documentary about the case. And I'm going to stop telling right here, right now, what happened after that, because there are more twists and turns in the story to come, more so than the previous things we've talked about. And so if anyone wants to hear the rest of the story, you're going to have to come to the after meeting.
Yeah, you're going to have to come to the after meeting. It's quite the little drama you've laid out for everyone. So if you want to find out what the DNA results were for this and how this all turned out, make sure that you visit the AFTA website at afdaa.org and click on the meetings button, and you can register right there directly from the website. There's information on the conference hotel as well. So I'm looking for, I have to confess, I already know how it turns out. So, but I'm not telling
the
either.
rest of your listeners won't be disappointed if they come attend it. Because like I said, there's a lot of twists and turns, interesting things that happen. And I'll, I was happy in a way to be part, at least a little footnote of the Zodiac history. Because when these things first took place, I was like 7 years old, and I do remember, not necessarily then, but later on, hearing about the case, and then I really took an interest in the case. I think it was around 1984 when Joe Warren and I were working together. He picked up a book by Robert Graysmith called Zodiac, and so I read that, and Robert Graysmith did a really good job in terms of putting out all the information there that was on the Zodiac at the time. And so then I really took a real interest in this case. So it was, like I said, it was kind of nice to be part of that little piece of that maybe history of, one of the coldest, mysterious cases of the 20th century, and one that I practically grew up with, So, like I said, it'll be interesting to hear some of the twists and turns. So we'll see if the case is actually closed or not.
Yeah. Yeah, there you are, part of the history of this case now, too. So I'll link information in the show notes for, I probably can't find that primetime documentary, a link to that, because that's been quite some time. But we might be able to link to the Susan Mustafa that you mentioned, the author, maybe this other book that Dr. Warren had mentioned to you as well. And of course, I definitely want to share information about your laboratory as well, as it's the Scales Biological Laboratory. There's always people that have cold cases or just need help with understanding, if they've got forensic evidence in the case, and you're available as a resource.
Yes.
I just want to make sure everyone knows how to get in touch with you if they need some of your services too.
Yeah, if you can link it to my website, it's www.forensicscienceresources.com.
Yeah, definitely will do that. Thank you very
welcome.
much
My
for
pleasure.
taking the time to come on the show.
I've got a face made for podcasts.
Yeah, my guests are always happier to hear when I say the podcast is audio only. They're like, okay, I'll consider it then. Us scientists are mostly a shy lot. So, great. So thank you so much. And again, if anybody has any feedback about this episode, is interested in learning more and can't attend the meeting, email me at hello@secretsfromthecrimelab.com and let me know your thoughts. Maybe in a little while we can convince George to come back on the podcast after the AFTA meeting and tell the rest of the story for those of you who couldn't make it.
I would love that.
Yeah. So if you're interested, email me, hello@secretsfromthecrimelab.com, and let me know. All right. Thanks, and have a good night.